Those of you who are joining us online, you're welcome as well. As you're aware, Larry is away today. I think he mentioned that last week and asked me to fill in for him, and I'm happy to do that. Larry's doing double duty this time. I'm not sure you're aware of that. Not only has he been doing this class on Sunday morning, but also doing a Wednesday morning class. So he probably needs a little relief. We're not going to pursue his Ecclesiastes study. We're going to go off in a little different direction this morning. I think we've only got one or two more lessons that finishes up this quarter, but we'll let him resume his study on Ecclesiastes when he gets back. We're going to deal with a topic called selfless giving. Probably when you hear that word giving in a setting like this, you think of dropping a check in the box back there. And obviously that's one part of our giving, but it's only a part of our giving. We're going to go beyond the basics and look at other aspects of giving and ways we can give, why we give, our motives and our motivations and our reasons for giving is important. Giving is among the most basic concepts, components of our Christian discipleship. Christians give. So we're going to look at various aspects of that giving because selfless giving represents one's true wealth. One of the characteristics of God. For God so loved, what's the next phrase? That He gave. His love prompted Him to give. And love will prompt us to give. We can give without loving, can't we? Say yes. But you cannot love without giving. They are natural components together. They're appendages of each other. If you love, you will give. But you might give without loving. God, when we give, we actually emulate God Himself because it's one of the major characteristics of His character, of His being, of who He is. He gives us grace. He gives us mercy. He gives us compassion. The psalmist said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I will not want. He will give me what I need." Paul writes and says, "My God shall supply all your needs." So God is a giver. And in emulating His character and His quality and trying to mold ourselves in His image and to be as He is, giving is necessarily and naturally going to be one of our traits. How we give is important. God loves a cheerful giver. For God loves a cheerful giver, and He delights in the one whose heart is in His gift. So how we give, why we give is important. The giving is important, but how the motive and the motivation is important as well. So as I said, we can give without loving. And there are various ways we can do that. We might give grudgingly. And we got an example of that in the book of Acts. Those first Christians have come into Jerusalem and they get to celebrate Pentecost. And they have heard Peter's gospel sermon and they have responded to it and they're going to stay. Let's back up a little bit here. They're going to stay because they're kind of caught up with the excitement and the experience. And so we see the church beginning with 3,000. Read over a couple of chapters and it's 5,000. Read over a chapter more and they can't even count them all. They've multiplied to be multitudes. And so consequently, there's some there who have needs. And these Christians Luke tells us, are generous. They're selling their property. They're giving whatever they can to anybody who has needs. They're giving, and they're giving joyfully. They're giving cheerfully. They're giving generously. So God so loved, these early Christians so loved. So we're going to link these two concepts together, giving and loving. You might give, wrong button. You might give grudgingly. You give, but you don't want to give. And we got a case here of a man named Ananias. We read earlier that the disciples were selling their property, and they're bringing the resources from those sales to the apostles to distribute to whomever needed. And so Ananias and his wife Sapphira see that happening. They got a piece of property. And consequently, they sold their property. They bring the money to the disciples, lay it at their feet. Except, as you see on the slide here, they kept back part of the money for himself. And he brought the rest, laid it at the apostles' feet. And Peter says, "Why'd you do this?" He's not condemning him for selling his property. He's condemning him for lying about what he has done. Because as he lays it at the apostles' feet, he indicates that that's all he got for the property. And Peter says, while the land was yours, you didn't have to sell it. That's a choice, a decision you made. And when you got the money, how much you gave back, that's your choice as well. So he's not condemning him for the sale. He's condemning him for if you gave it back halfway, that's okay. But he gave grudgingly. He didn't want to give it all. Maybe he wanted to seek some praise. Maybe he wanted to be commended as Barnabas had been for his generosity. So we can give hoping to be praised for our generosity. And this is a common problem that Jesus encountered with the Pharisees. The Pharisees, Jesus said, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, and you must obey them. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Everything they do is to be seen of men. The Pharisees operated on the basis of rules, rituals, regulations, and rhetoric. And so they were driven oftentimes by giving, but giving for the wrong reason. They did many good things, but many good things for the wrong reason. They gave hoping to get praise. And the scene that Jesus paints on Giving Day and the widow's mite, and they made a big deal when they went up to give their donation. Whereas on the other hand, the widow kind of sneaks up there to drop in her meager gift. Be careful, do not do your acts of righteousness to be seen of men. When you give, don't announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do, to be honored of men. They've received their reward in full. If that's all they're after, then they got what they're after when they received the praise and the adoration for their quote-unquote generosity. So it's possible to give without loving, but not possible to love without giving. Sometimes we might give in hopes of getting something back. What's in it for me? Maybe we give and kind of thinking of it as an investment. Now, obviously, this elephant's not going to get anything back for his generosity here. But love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting anything in return. So it's kind of the concept that we've heard from time to time about random acts of kindness. You do things for people without expecting them to return. It's the concept of pay it forward. You know, you're not expecting them to pay you back. Your expectation is that because they have been helped, then they will feel kind of an obligation to help others and pay it forward. We've got a number of examples of that happening. But help other people without expecting anything in return. Give without thinking of it as an investment. Good example of that, and by the way, your questions and your comments are welcomed. I'll try to give you an opportunity to do that, and I think we've got a mic runner back there if we need it. A great example of this give, all these things that we've mentioned, is the story of the Good Samaritan. You're familiar with this story. A lawyer comes to Jesus with a question, not for information, but a question hopefully that will entrap Jesus, that will cause him to make an answer to get him in trouble with somebody. And so his question is rather simple. What is the greatest commandment? Now surely, out of all those 600 plus commandments, Jesus can't pick one that says is more important and more significant than any of the others. But as always is the case, Jesus has a ready answer. That's an easy question. He said, not only I'll give you the greatest, but the second greatest. Love God, love your neighbor. That's simple. All the other commandments kind of flow out of those two. If you love God and love your neighbor, you're going to obey all these other commandments. And so the lawyer comes back and says, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, well, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, long time ago, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thieves. And they beat him up, and they robbed him, and they left him for dead in the middle of the road. Two of the religious leaders of the day came by, a priest and a Levite, and seeing the man lying in the road, passed by on the other side. They got other things to do. And maybe you can kind of justify what, or in their minds they could. And then comes a hated, despised Samaritan. Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. They are dogs. And so the last man you would expect to help this beat up, robbed victim would be a Samaritan. But he stops. He tends to the man's wounds, puts him on his donkey, takes him into the city, checks him into an inn, tells the innkeeper, you keep a tab on whatever expenses he might incur while he's here, and I'll be back and cover those expenses. Here is a man who gave with love, not expecting anything in return, gave a total stranger of his resources, and said to him, what is mine is yours if you need it. A great example of giving motivated by loving. So it's a natural extension. Not possible to give without loving, although God commands it, and we assume that, we know that. But if I truly love him, and I love my neighbor as myself, then selfless giving is going to be no problem. If I only give to obey a command, then I've missed the point of giving. Goes well beyond that just checking a box. I put a check in the box back there, so I've done my duty. Obviously, that's more than goes well beyond that. Any thoughts or questions or comments regarding those thoughts up to this point? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Carla. Got a mic coming.
I was going to talk loud, but I understand what you're saying, that God loves a cheerful giver, and I think that that's something that's learned.
Right.
And I have an example of my younger brother when we both got an allowance, and we were expected to keep part of that allowance to give at church on Sunday. Right. And one morning, my brother had a quarter and a dime, and he asked my dad, I don't know which one I should take to give. And my dad said, well, God loves a cheerful giver. And he said, well, then I'm going to take the dime. And my dad said, okay. And I think that as a kid, I don't remember how old he was. It wasn't very young. I'm very, very old. Hopefully that would grow as he grew.
Right.
But you got to start somewhere. So
Right.
I just thought that was kind of a cute story.
A cheerful giver. He may not have been cheerful to give the quarter.
Right.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I can talk loud.
You can't hear you at home.
One time, this is long ago, my car did something and I was on the side of the road. It was late at night. And this family pulled over to help me. It was a husband and wife and 3 or 4 kids crammed in the cab of a truck. And they just took me to a gas station where there were payphones. This was a while ago. And I offered to give them money for helping me. And he said, give it to the Lord on Sunday.
And you did.
And I did. But I have never, since then, I've never had anyone say that to me. And I don't think I'll ever forget that. Just
Right.
him saying that to me just really plucked my heartstrings. It was
Powerful lesson.
yes.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, Jesus often used everyday events and activities to make his point. The parables, great examples of that. And he used things that people would know, that they just saw every day. Planting crops, cleaning house, getting married, paying taxes. We know that one. Harvesting crops. You know, a lot of things that just people would know about every day, and he takes those situations and he uses them to make his point. You know, the standard definition of a parable is something like a everyday gift for a spiritual lesson or something similar to that. Anyway, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of everyday events that will illustrate this point of selfless giving. You may be familiar with this short story from your high school English class. You may not. You may not remember your high school English class. The Gift of the Magi, it's a short story written by a man named O. Henry. It was published in 1905. And it's the story of a young couple, Jim and Della. They're newlyweds. Christmas is coming. And each one, obviously, to demonstrate their love to their partner, wanted to give them a special gift. Each one has a very special, treasured possession. For Jim, it's a pocket watch. Now, we don't carry pocket watches anymore, but it's very common in the early 20th century. And Jim had a pocket watch, and it's very special to him. It had been his grandfather's watch. And his grandfather had handed it down to Jim's father, and Jim's father had handed it down to him. So it's got a lot of sentimental value. Normally, a man would have a nice gold chain attached to that pocket watch so he could pull it out of his watch pocket. Jim didn't have a chain. He had kind of a beat up old leather strap that he attached to the watch. So Della said, for Christmas, I'm going to get him that gold chain. But she didn't have any money. As is often the case with young couples starting out on their journey together, resources are limited, to say the least. I know it wasn't our case. But anyway, she had managed to save a little bit here and there out of the grocery money, and she had $1.87. I was not going to buy the gold chain. Her prized possession was her hair. She had long, beautiful hair, went all the way down her back. And Jim had seen in a department store a nice box with brushes and combs for her hair. And he determined he was going to get her that for Christmas. Well, it's Christmas Eve. Della's desperate. How can I get that gold chain? So she went to a wig maker who cut her hair all the way up to her neckline. Gave her $20. She went to the store, bought that gold chain. Jim, desperate to get those brushes and combs, sold his watch. So you can imagine the scene as they came home that afternoon, and Jim notices her hair's gone. And she noticed his watch is not in his pocket. What's the moral of that story? Well, no possession is so important that I wouldn't give it up to demonstrate my love to another. Gifts motivated by love. The unconditional love of this couple holds more value than any gift ever could. Love prompted them to give up their most treasured possessions in order to give sacrificially to the one that they love. The gift of the Magi, of course, he used that title in reference to the wise men who came to Jesus to give gifts. Powerful example of giving sacrificially and giving motivated by love. Any thoughts about this? Yes, ma'am. Here comes the...
I can't speak that loud.
Don't hurt yourself, Dave. Yes, ma'am.
When we're talking about precious gifts to give, for me, the hardest thing for me to give is my time.
Right, we're going to get to that too.
Oh, okay. I'll stop there
Oh,
then.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, just that sometimes it's easier for me to give money, but to give my time,
Sure.
busy life. And for that gentleman to have stopped on the side of the road to help that man, I'm sure he was
Sure.
at some place he had to be, so just time.
Good. Time is important, and we're going to develop that thought a little bit later. Any other thoughts? Let me tell you this lady's story. Osceola McCarty. Everybody called her Miss Ola. She was born in 1906. And you notice the caption there. She is a washwoman. She lives in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Her father was never part of her life. She lived with her grandmother, her mother, and her aunt. And their job, their occupation, was a washwoman. And this is an occupation that doesn't exist anymore. This would be before the people had washing machines in their homes. And so people would bring their laundry to her and her family each week to wash and iron and deliver back. Now they washed it over a big wash tub, a big black kettle over an open fire to keep the water hot. And they used a rub board. So you can imagine What a job that was. Some of the most prominent people in town, attorneys, doctors, bankers, brought their laundry to that family each week. And they would spend the day washing clothes, hanging clothes on the line, ironing clothes in the evening. Well, Miss Ola's grandmother died when Ola was in the 6th grade. So she dropped out of school so she could help out with the family business. But from the very beginning, she made it a point to save some money out of her quote unquote income. And it got to be a pretty good little pile, and she's a little concerned about its safety, and so she took it to the bank and she opened a checking account. But after a while, the teller that worked with her each week says, "You never write any checks. Why don't you put this in a savings account? It'll make a little interest." And she did. And after a while, it grows a little more, and so why don't you buy a CD? That'll make you a little more interest. Well, eventually, Mother died, Aunt died, and Miss Ola is the sole proprietor of this washing business. To say she lived frugally is a gross understatement. She lived in grandmother's house. She had a black and white TV that gets 2 channels. She never owned a car, never learned to drive. She would walk to the grocery store and buy the most basic things, foodstuffs. Friends would pick her up to take her to church every Sunday. Some friends convinced her to buy a window unit air conditioner. And she did, but she would turn it on only when she had company. So she lived a very simple life. She said, "I learned to know the difference between want and need," something I think a lot of us need to learn. But life was simple for her. She never bought anything on credit. And she continued to put money back each week from her sale. But she's getting old. Her hands with arthritis. The demand for her services is diminishing as people begin to get washing machines in their house. And so finally it got down to the point where she just couldn't do this anymore, and the business is drying up, as it were. So she got with the banker and an attorney whose families, both of which she had done their laundry over the years. And they came in and they said, we need to kind of set up an estate plan for you. What to do with this money that's accumulated over a while. And you would think, well, that'll be a pretty simple process. She won't have very much. She had managed to save over those decades $250,000, $250,000, because she put it back each week, never touched it, and it just grew. So what are we going to do with $250,000? Well, she said, I've got a couple of cousins I'd like to leave some money to. I want to give some to my church. I need to keep some for myself to live on. And by the time they calculated all that out, there was $155,000 left. Well, what do you want to do with that? Now, what she could have said was, I've done without all these years. I think I'll do some serious upgrading. I think I'll buy me a big screen TV. I know what I want. I'm going to buy me a washing machine. That's not what she said. She said, what I'd like to do with that money is to help some students at the university. University of Southern Mississippi is in Hattiesburg. And she said, when I was a youngster, I wanted to be a nurse. and I never had that opportunity. So I'd like to use that money to help nursing students at the university. She'd never been on that campus. She didn't know a single soul. She didn't know any of the administrators. She didn't know any of the faculty. She didn't know any of the staff. She didn't know any of the students. But she said, I want to help, and I don't know who they are, but I want to help students who want to be nurses. So they established an endowed scholarship. Now, $155,000 is not very much for an endowed scholarship. But the university obviously jumped on that. And they promoted it and they publicized it. She got written up in all the major newspapers across the country. Time magazine wrote an article about it. And as word got out, people began donating to that fund to the point that it got up to $500,000, $500,000. Harvard gave her an honorary degree. President Clinton gave her the Presidential Citizens Award. She got invited to go to New York City to pull the lever to drop the crystal ball on New Year's Eve. The first time she had ever ridden in an airplane. First time she'd ever stayed in a hotel. And she was kind of flabbergasted by all this attention. She said, I can't do much, but I can do something to help somebody. And what I can do, I will do. I wish I could do more. There is a bronze statue of her based on this picture right here on the campus of that university today, honoring her as one of their major donors. Remarkable story of selfless giving. Any thoughts or comments? Nope, don't. Okay, we'll get to your, how can I give? Well, obviously I can give money. And we have different levels of how we can do that. Some have more to give than others. But obviously that's one obvious way to do it. But I can give time. And that's sometimes maybe more challenging than giving money, because our time is not always our own. I'm amazed at the amount of time that John and Rebecca give to our LTC program, and others who volunteer with that. Some of you go to summer camp every year and spend a quiet, restful week with teenagers. Volunteering your time, doing what needs to be done. But this is difficult because sometimes we don't always have control of our time. A lot of other people plunge into our time from time to time. But time is one of the ways that we give, not expecting anything in return. I can give service. Boy, this diaper bank program is incredible. Linda West and Stacy and Linda BK, for the time and the service that they, not expecting anything in return, but here's a basic need for people in our community, and they give countless hours of time serving that need. A while back in the fall, Lori sent out an email saying some people need leaves raked. Hands went up. Yeah, I can do that. Take care of that need for people. Our deacons, boy, the service they give, a lot of times kind of behind the scenes, unnoticed. Periodically, a word will go out. Certain members are sick. They need some meals. And so people get in the kitchen and start cooking, delivering those meals, serving others, giving of their time and their service willingly, joyfully, and unselfishly. Well, here's one we all can do: encouragement. And we all need this. it costs little time and no money. Paul's very last letter is to Timothy, 2 Timothy. Paul's in prison at the time. He's not just in prison, he's in death row. And he writes this letter to Timothy to kind of pass the torch. Timothy, I'm not going to be here. The time of my departure is at hand. But the work's got to go on, and I'm counting on you to do that. And he gives him encouragement, he gives him edification, he pushes him, promotes him, everything he can do to keep Timothy on track. But also in his cell, he remembers. He remembers people. Some he remembers fondly, some not so much. But he mentions in chapter 1 of 2 Timothy a man named Onesiphorus. I don't know what kind of mother would name her child that. But anyway, Onesiphorus, Paul singles him out and says, he often refreshed me. He lifted me up. He encouraged me. He built my spirits. Paul must have had times when he was very discouraged. And Onesiphorus was a man who refreshed him, who built him up, who encouraged him from time to time. In fact, Onesiphorus lived in Ephesus, and he traveled to Rome, where Paul was. And he said he looked me up at great expense to himself, time-wise, otherwise, risk-wise. And he said he didn't just do this to me one time. He often refreshed me. And you remember, Timothy, you remember what he did back in Ephesus. That's just who he was. That was his lifestyle. He was an encourager. And so, remembering times when we can encourage, build up one another, bear one another's burdens, consider how we may spur one another to love and to good deeds, and various other ways that we can help. These folks over here, it's not many weeks that I go by that I don't get something in my mailbox from Miss Huska over here, right? Little things, but still words of encouragement, building you up, and you probably get them too. Got a note not too long ago from another member, and this is an easy thing to do. It takes very little time, costs no money, just being observant. Being aware of people's needs and how encouraging encouragement can be. So, thoughts, comments here? Anything to add to this? Yes, ma'am. Miss Chloe?
You speak of people giving time and service, and I think of our teachers that are in our classes who don't just off their cuff have to stand up and do a class for us, but to spend quite a bit of time beforehand preparing a class for us like yourself. But there's Larry and plenty of others the women who teach, or men who teach the children and all. That is huge for all of us.
Absolutely. Good point. We got a lot of others who serve in various capacities, but our teachers are an important part of that. Yes, Shelby.
Just a question for you. I'd like your input on it. When we think about giving, probably one of the most challenging passages in there is about the widow, the mite that she gave, all that she had. Interesting passage. And she gave all that she had, basically becoming destitute, I guess, if she didn't have any more. I don't know, I've lived a few years, and I don't know of anybody that has ever done that. She was honored for doing that. What's your take on that?
Wow, what a challenge. She's destitute anyway. I mean, she's already in a bad situation. But you're right, I don't know of anybody who's given everything that they have. I've known of some people who've given a whole lot and put themselves in some difficult situations because of their giving. But that's a great question, but I don't have an answer to that. Anything else? God, Jim and Della, the Good Samaritan, Miss Ola, all gave. Onesiphorus loved so much that they gave. You cannot separate loving and giving. It's a natural outgrowth, a natural appendage. Those two concepts go together like peanut butter and jelly. If you love, you give. And you do it joyfully, you do it generously, and you do it liberally. Yes, Don?
We were having a meal one time, and our granddaughter was there, and she was giving us a hard time. She wasn't a kid, she was an adult. And a gentleman in a booth near us got up and come over and says, "I can see that you're having a really rough time." He says, "I'll be praying for you." Every time that Ed Ross came in, he told me that he'd spent the week praying for me. That is a deep blessing.
Right. Praying would go into that category of encouraging. Well, when you know you're being prayed for, it's a great source of strength. Okay. Anything else before we close out here? Well, thank you for your attention and your comments. I appreciate it. Larry will be back next week. And we are done.